I'm calling to order this meeting. This is an additional meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. The time is 11:58 in the morning. This meeting is being conducted in person in the Council Chambers, Room 500 of the Johnny Wilson Building, but is also enjoying participation by several members virtually by Zoom video conference broadcast platform. This meeting is being broadcast live on Council Channel 13 and is available to the public on the council's website, which is www.dccouncil.gov. We have three measures for markup in the Committee of the Whole and one other measure that was adopted by another committee and is coming through the Committee of the Whole to be agendized for today's legislative meeting. Following this Committee of the Whole meeting, there will be a legislative meeting, which will be the regular legislative meeting for the month of April. We begin our Committee of the Whole meetings with determining whether there's a quorum. We could have some quiet in the chamber, please. Mr. Cash, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Allen.
Here.
Councilmember Bonds.
Here.
Councilmember Fruman.
Present.
Councilmember Gray.
Yeah, here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George.
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Pinto.
Present.
Councilmember Robert White.
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. The first item for markup is Bill 25-28, which is entitled Cassandra S. Pinckney Way Designation Act of 2023. Bill 25-28 would symbolically designate 10th place southeast between Mississippi Avenue and Savannah Street as Cassandra S. Pinckney Way. The location is in Ward 8. It's a symbolic naming for ceremonial purposes and is in addition to and subordinate to any name that is an official name. Cassandra Pinckney was a native Washingtonian. She graduated from Spingarn High School in 1967. Early in her career, she worked at Howard University Hospital, running parenting classes and working with infants withdrawing from congenital drug addiction. Eventually, she became the early childhood special education coordinator for the DC Public Schools, where she worked from 1999 to 2002. In 2003, Ms. Pinckney and Dr. Joe Smith co-founded Eagle Academy, the first exclusively early childhood public charter school in the district. Eagle Academy's early childhood education model would go on to be adopted at schools throughout the district, creating an innovative and thriving pre-kindergarten system citywide. Ms. Pinckney made regular video messages dubbed fireside chats in which she talked to parents about how to prepare their children for school. She died at the age of 68 in September 2016 as a result of complications from surgery. This legislation was first introduced as Bill 24-1062 in October last year, co-introduced with 6 council members. The Committee of the Whole held a hearing on this legislation or on that legislation on December 12th, 2022. And has then and since has received no testimony or comments in opposition to the legislation. Because of the expiration of Council Period 24, the bill was reintroduced as Bill 25-28 on January 11th, 2023 by Councilmember White and 8 council members. Symbolically designating the street fronting Eagle Academy's flagship school on 10th Place Southeast serves as a reminder of Ms. Pinckney's dedication to the district's youth. Thus, assuming that this is approved, the Committee of the Whole recommends council approval of Bill 25-28, the Cassandra S. Pinckney Way Designation Act of 2023. Without objection, I'll move both the print and the report with leave for staff to make technical, conforming, and editorial changes. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on the print and report with leave for staff. Mr. Cash.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
The print and report are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report is filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The next item for markup is Bill 25-111, the Reverend Lloyd N. Young Court Designation Act of 2023. This bill, Bill 25-111, would officially designate the public alley within Square 4546 as Reverend Lloyd Young Court Northeast. Square 4546 is bounded by 17th and 18th Streets Northeast and E and D Streets Northeast. It's in the Rosedale neighborhood, I believe. The location is in Ward 7, and this is an official naming which typically involves the designation of postal addresses and enables the placement of the primary entrance to residences or offices. The Reverend Lloyd Young Court is the proposed name for an alley system with an internal developable lot. The owner of the lot seeks a name for the alley in order to obtain the necessary district agency approvals for a by right development to replace a warehouse with an alley dwelling. Reverend Lloyd Young was born in Washington in November 1895. He attended Howard University's School of Religion and the Washington Baptist Seminary. He was licensed as a minister in 1923, ordained in 1928. Reverend Young served for 2 years as pastor of the Central Baptist Church and eventually became pastor of the Greater Mount Pisgah Baptist Church, as well as a guest pastor at a number of area churches. Reverend Young served in the U.S. Army in France during World War I. He retired from the church in 1957 after serving as pastor for 27 years. He passed away on May 29th, 1980 at the age of 84. The name for this street came from discussions with the ANC commissioner and the community. And as I said, will enable development of an interior lot in that alley, in that square. Officially designating this alley as Reverend Lloyd Young Court Northeast will allow for the construction of an alley dwelling and will honor Reverend Young, who was an upstanding community member. For these reasons, assuming the committee approves, the committee of the whole recommends the approval of Bill 25-111, the Reverend Lloyd N. Young Court Designation Act of 2023. This legislation was introduced on February 1st of this year by myself and council members Allen and Gray. The committee of the whole held a public hearing on March 14th, 2023. The committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to this legislation. Without objection, we'll move both the print. I will move both the print and report, with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to note this is an alley that previously was in Ward 6, is now in Ward 7 as a result of redistricting, but previously under ANC 6A had been working on a naming. Ran into an issue where the ANC wanted to name it for a space that had already been named for the same person. And I know you could not move it forward at that time, but you committed to working on a resolution and getting this done. And so I want to thank you and Councilmember Gray for working with the ANC and neighbors so that this could move forward. So I appreciate you being good to your word, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on both the print and report with leave for staff.
Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. The bill and both the print and the report are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report and hearing record are filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The third item for markup in the committee is Bill 25-146, entitled the Howard East Towers Alley Closing and Street Dedication Act of 2023. This legislation would close a 16-foot wide portion of the alley system in Square 2873. And it would also dedicate land in the square to extend the right-of-way for 9th Street Northwest. The square is bounded by 9th Street, 8th Street, Berry Place, and V Street Northwest. It's near Howard University. The alley closure and land dedication will facilitate the development of a mixed-use building with approximately 500 multifamily units and 17,300 square feet of retail space. A minimum of 40 units will be set aside for households with incomes of 60% or less of median family income. Although the developer has agreed to pursue low-income housing tax credits or LIHTC capitalization for the IZ component, which may increase the total number of affordable units to 60. The project is consistent with the Duke framework for a cultural destination for Greater Shaw U Street, otherwise known as the Duke Plan, and which was approved by the council in 2005. And it is also consistent with the Howard University Central Campus Master Plan. The development project will also provide greater pedestrian and vehicular connectivity by extending the 9th Street right-of-way, constructing a new block of Bryant Street between 8th and 9th Street, and widening sidewalks along 8th Street and 9th Street. Assuming that this is approved, the committee finds that the portion of the public alley in Square 2873 is unnecessary for alley purposes. The committee also finds that the dedication of land in Square 2873 is in the public interest. Accordingly, the committee recommends council approval of the committee print for Bill 25-146. This legislation was originally introduced as Bill 24-1102 on November 4th, 2022. Committee of the Whole held a public hearing on that on that bill on December 12th, 2022. Because of the expiration of Council Period 24, the bill was reintroduced by me on February 22nd, 2023. Actually, it was reintroduced by Councilmember Nadeau on February 22nd, 2023. Because there was a committee hearing in December, we did not have a second hearing. The committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to this legislation. Without objection, I'll move both the print and report with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion? The vote will be on both the print and report with leave for staff. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. The print and report are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report is filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. We'll turn to consideration of measures from other committees. We have PR 25-141, Co-Pay Accumulator Amendment Act of 2023. This was reported out of the Committee on Health, chaired by Councilmember Christina Henderson. Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Copay Accumulator Amendment Act of 2023 requires insurance companies to treat any funds applied toward paying a patient's prescription drug copay as if it came from the patient directly. Some health insurers created copay accumulator programs to exclude the value of any coupon, discount, or other third-party financial assistance from counting towards a patient's deductible or out-of-pocket maximum. Thus, the patient must exhaust the financial assistance and then have to pay out-of-pocket costs him or herself. The insurance company in turns get a double benefit. First, receiving the copay from the patient assistance program, and then once that's exhausted, receiving the copay from the patient. This bill prohibits these copay accumulator programs, so patients will reach their deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums earlier, thus improving their access and affordability. This bill applies to all prescription drugs without a generic alternative or biosimilar. Pharmaceutical companies may use a patient assistance program to keep patients using expensive brand name drugs instead of switching to a lower cost generic. Excluding drugs with generics or biosimilar from the bill will contribute to lowering the premiums by preventing pharmaceutical manufacturers from keeping patients on branded drugs when a lower cost generic is available. The committee print balances ensuring patients receive the full benefit of their health insurance plans to access necessary medications, with ensuring pharmaceutical companies cannot take advantage of these programs to unduly increase healthcare costs. This legislation will lead to lower out-of-pocket costs for patients for necessary medications and will maximize the impact of every dollar that a resident spends on their medical care. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask for colleagues to support this measure and that this be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. That is going to conclude the business for this legislative meeting. This committee of the whole meeting. We will take about 5 minutes. Do we need that much time? Now, colleagues, the answer to that question comes from the folks who are actually managing the meeting, not me. So we need at least 3 minutes, and then we will start the legislative meeting. The time is 12:17 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Before I start the meeting, I want to note for council members that there was another amendment that I just circulated regarding the street vendor bill. It's legislative language. It was given to us by the chief financial officer maybe 15 minutes ago. And I didn't check on my email, but I believe that Blaine Stum on my staff just circulated it to members. So there'll be 3 amendments to the street vendor bill. The amendment nature of a substitute, the amendment that was circulated this morning at 10:21, and then a third amendment that was just circulated after noon. With that, I'm going to start the meeting if we're ready. I'm calling to order this meeting. This is the 5th legislative meeting of Council Period 25 of the Council of the District of Columbia. I am Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council, and today is Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. The time is 12:32 in the afternoon. This meeting is being held in the Council Chambers, Room 500 of the Johnny Wilson Building, although there are at least 2 members who are participating virtually via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform. This meeting is also being broadcast live on Council Channel 13 and is available on the council's website, which is www.dccouncil.gov. We always begin our legislative meetings with a moment of silence. It was noted to me that recently Judith Heumann passed away. She was the first director of the Department of Disability Services, and we actually have a resolution to honor her that's on today's agenda. I wanted to note that before we have a moment of silence. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Allen,
Here?
Councilmember Bonds,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman,
Here.
Councilmember Gray,
Here.
Councilmember Henderson,
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George. Here. Councilmember McDuffie,
Here.
Chairman Mendelson,
Present.
Councilmember Nadeau. Here. Councilmember Parker,
Present.
Councilmember Pinto. Present. Councilmember Robert White,
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We have the Secretary's report of committee filings. I'll recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Councilmember McDuffie.
And I'm going to move the waive the reading of the Secretary's report.
Been a motion to waive the reading of the Secretary's report. Is there discussion? On the motion by voice vote, all those in favor of waiving the reading, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any no votes? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the Secretary's report of introductions and referrals. Again, I'm going to recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Mr. McDuffie.
And I move to waive the reading of the Secretary's report of introductions.
Is there discussion? Voice vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any no votes? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the consent agenda. Are there any changes to the consent agenda? The consent agenda runs through page 7 and part of page 8. I'm not hearing any changes. All right, we'll have a roll call vote on the consent agenda. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember McDuffie,
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
All right, Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau. Yes. Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. We will turn to the non-consent agenda on page 8. And the first measure for consideration, final reading on Bill 25-68, the Street Vendor Advancement Amendment Act of 2023. There are 3 amendments to this bill. I will, in a second, move the amendment nature of a substitute, and then I will move this amendment circulated 1021, and then move the third amendment that I just referenced at the beginning of this meeting. This legislation came out of the Committee of the Whole on March 7th, I believe, and this legislation attempts to straighten out the vending regulations that have been law and regulation in the district for a number of years. It, among other things, and I'm not going to describe the bill entirely, sets up a pilot vending zone in the Mount Pleasant or Columbia Heights neighborhood, and it also decriminalizes street vending. So there's a civil infraction for violating the law. It also simplifies the requirements so that it will be less expensive and easier for individuals who want to do street vending to be able to do the street vending. So I move the bill, and I will move the amendment nature of a substitute, or I am moving the amendment nature of a substitute. The ANS, which was circulated yesterday, makes several substantive changes. First, to address concerns that were raised at the last meeting and by the Department of Health about changes to the cottage food law, the ANS strikes that language and instead creates a new license category, a micro enterprise home kitchen business that would enable sidewalk vendors to prepare food that they intend to sell via cart, table, or stand to prepare that in their homes. There are requirements around that. I won't read all of it, but it was in the notice as well as in the ANS. Second, the amendment nature of a substitute addresses concerns raised by several council members regarding the enforcement language. It clarifies that an enforcement officer may only request that an individual produce reasonable identification if the individual refuses to provide their legal name and current address, or if the enforcement officer has reason to believe that the individual is providing an incorrect name or address. The ANS defines the term detain to mean, quote, to stop and verbally order a person to remain at his or her current location or a nearby location specified by an enforcement officer, unquote. To ensure that enforcement officers do not use force when trying to identify an unlicensed vendor for purposes of issuing a civil infraction. The third change in the ANS would authorize the chief financial officer to provide amnesty to street vendors with delinquent minimum sales tax payments in coordination with the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. This language is actually modified by the third amendment that I will be moving, which I'll explain in a moment, and also modified by the second amendment, which I will also move in a moment. So the ANS makes those 3 changes regarding the micro enterprise, regarding enforcement, and regarding the amnesty. I think what I'll do is have discussion and call for a vote on the amendment nature of a substitute, and then move the next 2 amendments. Is there discussion on the amendment nature of a substitute? Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take a moment to thank my colleagues, you, Mr. Chairman, your staff, Councilmember Nadeau and your staff for working with myself and the committee as well as the Department of Health on this amendment. It's been a truly collaborative effort, and I believe this amendment strikes the right balance of creating a pathway for street vendors to prepare ready-to-eat food in their homes while also aligning with food safety best practices. So thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment nature of a substitute?
Chairman.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you so much, Chairman Mendelson. I have to admit, It's a pretty emotional moment that this day has finally come, and to see all of our representatives in the chamber today. I regret that I have to participate from home. I'm a little under the weather, but I'm grateful for the option for the hybrid hearing today, the hybrid session today. I'm thrilled to have in the chamber today, again, as always, the street vendors and advocates with Vendedoras Unidos and beloved Community Incubator, who've guided this process from the time when we first began working together to create access to grants, food handling, certification, commercial cooking space, and eventually this effort to change district law. This legislation would not have come into existence and likely would not have gone very far were it not for your tireless advocacy in ensuring your voices were heard. Thank you. I'm grateful to Councilmember Henderson and Chairman Mendelson for having joined me in this effort. And I know sometimes saying we'll work on it before second reading doesn't really happen, but for those who weren't involved, I can tell you a lot of time and effort went into this ANS. So I'm glad we were able to address concerns that were raised at first reading. Thankful to the chairman's staff who were able to resolve some of the issues with OTR. We want everyone in compliance and accountable. We want everyone safe and successful. So thank you. For Councilmember Henderson and Chairman Mendelson, this ANS makes the bill even better, and I hope we can continue working together on funding and implementation. I am excited that while this legislation is not yet funded, it allows for the immediate decriminalization of street vending when this passes mayoral and congressional review. If a business owner with a store has an expired license, police don't come and arrest them. The same should be true when a street vendor is out of compliance. Arresting them is preposterous. I will convey this to MPD, as I have been doing in communication with them for some time, about prioritizing MPD resources to other activities. And it concerns me that only a few days ago, I got reports of incidents in Ward 1 where vendors were being harassed by the police yet again. As the Ward 1 council member, I am very excited to see the establishment of the new Columbia Heights Mount Pleasant vending zone, as well as the required study of how best to support vendors with new physical infrastructure. And I'm happy to work with colleagues to see how the experience of this pilot zone can be helpful throughout the district. Today is the end of one story, but the beginning of another as we work together to fund and implement this bill. I'm glad that we included in the ANS emergency rulemaking provisions for DC Health to ensure the executive doesn't sit on their hands. I'll be working with Councilmember Henderson and our partners in this room to make sure that final regulations reflect the spirit of this law. One more thing to look forward to: just last week, DPR held its first public meeting on the design of a triangle park at 14th and Oak in Columbia Heights, one of the areas included in the new vending zone. And I was happy that vendors were represented at that meeting. I've advocated to DPR myself that this space should be built out with vending in mind from the very beginning. That project underscores that this bill is not just about who's allowed to do business in the district, but who our public spaces are for and who gets to participate in their future. The answer to all of those questions includes street vendors and the residents they serve. I want to finish my remarks where I started, with a thank you to the advocates who've raised their voices and put in time to making this legislation a reality. This is what civic engagement is supposed to look like, and you are a model for how residents can profoundly influence the legislative process. Congratulations to you all. I also want to thank the staff who worked so extensively on this bill from the very beginning of the process until today. Ali Bobak, who started on my constituent services team working on drafting the initial legislation and is watching from home today. David Meny and Ariel Ardura, Blaine Stum in Chairman Mendelson's office, Ona Bacchus in Councilmember Henderson's office. Thank you, Chairman, and I urge my colleagues to support the amendment in the nature of a substitute that I'm glad to join you and Councilmember Henderson on.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Is there further discussion on the amendment nature of a substitute? Is that Councilmember Lewis George?
Thank you, Chairman. I want to extend my gratitude to your team, but to Councilmember Nadeau for many years of leadership to bring street vending out of the shadows and into an accessibly regulated space where more people can safely earn a living and provide for their families. I have had the honor of meeting dozens of Ward 4 residents who make their living and their livelihood selling delicious home-cooked meals and snacks, beautiful art and jewelry and other goods. They all desire to be licensed and to follow rules without the risk of arrest, harassment, or devastating fines. I am thrilled today we begin to lift those fears and weights off their back by opening pathways to regulated sidewalk vending. I also appreciate the work that has been done to address food safety concerns from DC Health, because I know these adjustments will help more customers feel comfortable making purchases, which in turn means more money and stability for our vendors. This is a monumental step forward that I am excited to vote in favor of today. Congratulations to the street vendors who organized for years and overcame great challenges to get to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? I'd ask please that folks who are in the audience do not applaud. There are going to be more remarks. Is there further on the amendment nature of a substitute? All right, we're going to have a vote on the amendment nature of a substitute, and then we have the two amendments to follow, and then the bill is amended. On the amendment nature of a substitute by a voice vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The amendment is approved unanimously. We have the second amendment. That was circulated yesterday and, was circulated this morning at 10:21 by Mr. Stum on my staff. It makes some, I would say, minor changes, clarifying that the background check prohibition pertains to the application for sidewalk vending, whether it's before or after the application is submitted. And it also clarifies that for purposes of the amnesty, that the amnesty is not just for the tax, but also the interest and also the penalties. And there are a couple of other minor editorial, not editorial, but editing type changes. And it also clarifies that the study that the mayor is to do has to be completed no later than 1 year after the applicability date of this legislation. This legislation will be effective when it passes congressional review, but it is not applicable until it is fully funded, or at least certain provisions are fully funded. And so the study is required 1 year after that provision is funded. That's the essence of the amendment that I circulated this morning. I move it. Is there discussion? If there's no objection, the amendment will be accepted. Hearing no objection, the amendment is accepted. The third amendment was circulated, I believe, at 12:10. And this is an exercise in frustration. The amendment deals with the amnesty program. The amendment rewrites section 4. And section 4 in the amendment nature of a substitute, if I remember correctly, is 4 lines. And it now looks like it's about 50 lines. The reason why I say an exercise in frustration is because Mr. Stum on the committee, the whole staff had reached out to the Office of Tax and Revenue easily a week ago, asking if the language that we had regarding amnesty in section 4 was sufficient for them to implement the amnesty program, because we have from time to time run into I'm looking for the right word, the nice word, concerns with the chief financial officer with regard to the council's intent. We did not get a response until noon today. And the response we got was the language that is this amendment. And this is the language that the chief financial officer or the OCFO recommends in order for the amnesty program to be implemented. The intent is that those vendors who apply for a vending license and have outstanding taxes, that those taxes will be abated or waived or forgiven or not have to be paid, or whatever verb works. And that's the taxes as well as the interest and penalties. Do want to make clear that this is for those who apply for a vending license, and it's for the tax periods ending March 31st, 2010 through the quarter ending immediately after the effective date of this bill. So that's the amendment, is to implement, or rather to put into the bill as a section 4, the language that the chief financial officer says is adequate for them to implement the amnesty program. So I move the third amendment, which is entitled Amendment Number 2. And is there discussion or questions? Mr. Parker.
Do you have a copy of the amendment?
It was circulated electronically.
I am struggling to get online, so thank you.
I'll give you a moment. So section 4 in the amendment nature of a substitute said the CFO shall establish a program to provide amnesty. And the language instead will say conforming amendment that EC code 47-202.01 is amended by adding a new subsection to read as follows: notwithstanding certain sections, the CFO shall abate any unpaid portion of the assessment of the minimum tax imposed by this section. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
yes, Councilmember Henderson.
Does this amendment change the overall fiscal impact of the legislation?
No, because this section was subject to appropriation anyway, because it's a tax abatement.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Oh, were you done?
Councilmember Freeman.
Yeah. So am I understanding correctly? The original language was to establish a plan, and in effect, is this the plan?
Plan.
This
You-
is the mechanism through which it will be done. So it is this, if the original language was that they were to establish a plan, and then they came forward with language saying, this is how you will do it.
I'm confused. What we're talking about with this amendment is the amnesty for the tax that's owed. There is a separate provision requires the mayor to develop a vending plan.
Well, no, but read the language about the amnesty.
Oh,
the
The
four
original
lines.
language was the chief financial officer shall establish a program to provide amnesty to a taxpayer.
And then the new language establishes a program for.
And
an
the new
applicant.
language says notwithstanding certain sections, the CFO shall abate any unpaid portion of the assessment of the minimum tax. And then it goes on.
So in effect, it is the program through which the original language was calling for. So
Yes,
so
I
substantively,
think
it
that's the
doesn't,
correct reading.
substantively, it doesn't change it. It just takes it to the next step of establishing the program.
I think that's a fair way of putting it. I would put it a little differently, that this language from the CFO makes clear the CFO's authority to implement the amnesty. And unless I'm missing something, and I seem to have missed it in the past, the CFO giving us this language that this is what they need to do, what the council's intent is, which is this amnesty for vendors. Further discussion or questions? I apologize that this is last minute. Literally, we received this at about noon. If there's no objection, this amendment will be accepted. I'm not hearing any objection, so it is accepted. So this is where we are with the bill. We have Bill 25-68, which was the committee print, approved on first reading. We have the amendment nature of a substitute, which has been approved and then amended by amendment circulated this morning, and then amended again by this amendment, amendment number 2. So the bill is amended as before us. Is there any further discussion? All right, not hearing any. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll? This vote is on Bill 25-68 as amended.
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker,
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto,
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White,
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White,
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman,
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes, and Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill as amended is approved unanimously. We will turn now to the next measure. The next measure is Bill 25-164, Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to postpone the measure for consideration until our May 2nd of 2023 legislative meeting.
So motion to postpone the measure. Discussion. All those in favor of the motion to postpone, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The bill is postponed by unanimous vote. The next item is Bill 25-148, Motor Vehicle and Homeowner Insurance Prior Approval Rate Filing Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie.
Similarly, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to postpone the measure until our May 2nd, 2023 legislative meeting.
And a motion to postpone, is there discussion? On the motion to postpone to May 2nd, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We will turn now to reading and vote on proposed resolutions. We have PR 25-117, sense of the council on the establishment of an America 250 Commission Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 2026 will be the 250th anniversary of the country, and I think we can expect tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to come to the District of Columbia to celebrate that holiday. The folks leading that on the national level have called for the creation of task forces in every state to work on celebrations around that that reflect the history of their state. We here in the District of Columbia have a particularly compelling history that we want to be able to tell in this process. And this gives us a platform where we will have an audience from around the country to learn about our story in the context of the 250th anniversary of the country. The resolution calls for the mayor to create a task force to begin working on preparing to tell that story now. It's not too late and it's not too early. It's just the right time for us to really get organized, to be able to use this opportunity to make our case to the American people. One of the issues out there, obviously, is statehood. Another of the issues out there is the recent kerfuffles. It's a nice word with the Congress. But we offer a prism into American history that is really, really important. Just today's newspaper tells some of that story. In today's Washington Post, there's an op-ed about the election of 1876, which led to the Compromise of 1877. it's the 150th anniversary of that event, which is a tragic event in American history that brought on the era of Jim Crow. A different thing in today's newspaper alone is a story about in 1926, we had the Klan march on Pennsylvania Avenue, where 35,000 people marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in support of the Klan. If we get started now, we can do something really effective that draws on all of our communities to tell the story of the history of the District of Columbia, which in many ways is the history of the country, and make our case to the American public in yet a different way. And so this resolution calls on us to get started, working together with the mayor, working together with the folks on the national level, and including folks from all of our communities to get ready for this 250th anniversary. So with that, I urge my colleagues to support this sense of the council resolution.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. Is there discussion? Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to thank Councilmember Fruman for introducing this sense of the council. I am very enthusiastic for the welcoming of many folks from all over the country and the world to celebrate the 250th birthday of the United States of America on July 4th, 2026. I do just want to note in the National Park Service's efforts to make sure that this is an inclusive event, and our efforts to stand up a district-specific focus, that I think it's important that we include our own District of Columbia delegation. Our two senators, our shadow senators from the District of Columbia, and our representative from the District of Columbia are not given offices, are not given much staff. And it's really important that we support their efforts in our pursuit of statehood. And I think it's important that we include their perspective in the planning of the 250th. Thank you.
Further discussion? The vote will be on PR 25-117. I think we can do a voice vote on this. This is the sense of the council. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Are there any no votes? Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The resolution is approved unanimously. We'll turn now to emergency legislation. The first is food delivery fees transparency emergency. We have the declaration, which is PR 25-172. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When I voted for the Fair Meals Delivery Act last December, I assumed, like I think we all did, that third-party delivery companies would comply with the spirit of the law. However, I don't think the reality has played out that way. And as I previously stated, I don't think what's happening is meeting the spirit or intent of the law that we passed. To level set, let's share about how these delivery apps work. So delivery platforms like an Uber Eats or a DoorDash take a cut of the total sale from the restaurant sale. It's not an add-on cost that's passed on to consumers or an additional salary for drivers. It's taking a portion directly from the sale the restaurant would otherwise make for selling that meal that you just bought. In exchange, the restaurant's listed on their app, comes up in their relevant services, or at least that's what's supposed to happen. Last December, this council debated capping that big tech cut at 15% of the order, but we landed on a compromise that didn't actually cap those fees. And what we've started seeing this month, with the law taking effect a few weeks ago, is that our restaurants that are only paying 15% are getting bumped down or bumped out in search results unless they upgrade to a different package. The result is a major squeeze on your local favorite small restaurants across the city to hand out even more of that purchase price that you made on an app to the third party at a time when those local businesses are barely treading water and are trying to recover. I met again just yesterday with a group of small restaurants from wards 1, 4, 5, and 6, all of whom say this is a major issue for them right now, today. And the message was clear. They're asking for a citywide solution. Several local restaurants share that when the cut these delivery companies take goes above 15%, they aren't even covering the cost of making the meal itself. They're literally just cooking the food and sending it out with zero profit just to still be relevant. And these same businesses reported that delivery is anywhere from 30 to 50% of their total sales. Now, admit this is not going to apply to the Taco Bell or McDonald's, but to your favorite neighborhood restaurant, your favorite place to have a nice meal delivered, it's a serious problem that's dramatically impacting their viability. Meanwhile, these big out-of-state tech corporations with a few companies largely dominating the space are doing exceptionally well. Last year, Uber Eats generated nearly $11 billion, which represents a 31% increase over the previous year's revenue. DoorDash last year made $6.6 billion, a 35% increase from the previous year. And that's on top of around a 70% increase in revenue for those big companies from just the year before that. That's a pretty incredible trend line, but it's not even close to what our local businesses are seeing. Online delivery platforms have quickly transformed the marketplace, and they're doing very, very well. Now, I have no problem with them. They fill a necessary role and consumers want to use their services, but we've got to be willing to jump into the space to protect our local DC businesses. Our local restaurants are the ones that have struggled to keep their doors open during the pandemic, and they're now struggling with these rising fees that only pad the already massive revenues for these delivery apps. We need this bill today because, and again, I want to reemphasize this, these aren't fees tacked onto the final bill. It's a cut from the cost of making the meal, buying the ingredients, running the kitchen, paying the chef and staff salaries to cook and prepare your meal. It doesn't go to the drivers. If I can have 30 more seconds, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
It goes to the people who own the algorithm. And I think 15% is a reasonable cap and one that should be taken seriously. I've spoken with both DoorDash and Uber Eats. They're well represented and the phone calls came quick, as I'm sure many of my colleagues also noticed. And I agree there's an area that deserves more conversation, which is why I'm introducing a permanent bill today as well. We need to further examine issues around businesses coming up in searches based on geographic distance and pricing itself, two issues flagged for me by DC's own restaurant association. I know they're closely following this issue and they care about it as well for their many members. So the bill today doesn't touch those issues because they deserve more discussion. Topic's perfect for a permanent bill and hearing, but we can and should act today to get the basics right. To be on these platforms, the cut from big tech is capped at 15% without corresponding punishment and how visible the restaurant is on the platform. This emergency action does not solve every problem, nor is it intended to, but it's a necessary step that our local restaurants need. Nothing in this precludes any restaurants from taking advantage of additional marketing services or premium services deserving of a higher cut. But we want to see those services, or more accurately, show those services to our restaurants, because right now, restaurants are telling us these higher fees are feeling more like a shakedown than an upgrade. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll move the declaration and hope my colleagues will support that.
Discussion on the declaration? Councilmember
Mr.
McDuffie?
We had a fairly extensive discussion about this in the legislative breakfast this morning, and so I don't want to rehash every single detail. But I actually support the spirit of this emergency in its attempt to address challenges that our restaurants face. Because our restaurants still face challenges, despite the fact that technically the citywide health emergencies and public emergencies are over. Technically, they're over, but practically the restaurants are still facing challenges. The reason I don't support the emergency, and I'm not going to vote for it, is because it really doesn't address any of the issues that restaurants have described to me and my team on the committee. It's not to say that they aren't issues. What I'm suggesting, I want my colleagues to be mindful of, is that the committee has tried to approach this in a very thoughtful manner. Hence, the permanent legislation that we introduced last year, held a hearing on, and voted for unanimously. And so, while this is an attempt to address some of the existing issues, ultimately, I don't think it has the efficacy in which some of the proponents think it will have. And I think you don't really need to look much further than the fact that it's had about 2, maybe 3 iterations in less than a week since it was first introduced. And some of the things and language around the apps, the restaurants being discoverable on apps, has been deleted. I'm not exactly sure what that means. And so my comments here are more about what a thoughtful process should look like rather than move in haste and not address any. And I want to also raise another thing. We've heard people talk about the third-party delivery apps. We've heard people talk about the restaurants. I've not heard a single person talk about the delivery drivers who are also a part of this economy, largely Black and brown, who want to continue to be able to deliver restaurant meals to people across our city. You know, I'm always open to working with colleagues to try to get things right, the council, and this doesn't really rise to the level of something that's going to substantively change things, which is probably why another moment, Mr. Chair.
Without objection.
Which is probably why the Restaurant Association just today, I don't know exactly what time, but my staff just sent me a statement where the Restaurant Association does not support this legislation. I think that's meaningful for folks to think about. The Restaurant Association represents 1,400 members. Earlier in the breakfast, it was said that they don't represent small businesses. Actually, they do. My understanding that the original tweet from a local restaurant on 8th Street is one of the members of the Restaurant Association. And they don't support this legislation today, but they are willing to continue to work with my colleagues and myself on the council to figure out how we can address some of the challenges that they're facing. The last thing I'll say, Mr. Chair, is I have been in constant conversation with restaurants across the District of Columbia. Almost every day I'm talking to restaurants. I've got a number of issues that they've raised with me and my staff. Guess what? This emergency bill wasn't one of them. So I would just urge us as a body to be more thoughtful about how we approach some of these issues and think about where it is appropriate for the council to intervene and where it's appropriate for two businesses to negotiate and figure things out themselves, because it might become the sort of slippery slope that every couple of weeks we're trying to do something different. And I'm not going to support that. I'm not sure what the permanent bill is going to look like. I trust it's going to look different than the emergency. But I'm always willing to work with my colleagues to try to resolve what I think is a shared goal to support our local restaurant industry. I just don't think this bill does that.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. Further,
Chairman,
Councilmember Trayon White.
I have a question. Councilmember Allen, I know you said you spoke to some of the restaurants. Are they a part of the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington?
Some of them are, some of them are not.
I did hear sentiments from the organization that they supported a lot of parts of this bill, but today they're not in support of the emergency legislation. And it's our belief that we want to be supportive of the restaurants during a troubled time that they're struggling coming out of pandemic. But I'm also concerned for the drivers and those who do deliveries, because I know that this council also passed legislation that empowered DC for hire vehicles to pretty much go after them. And most of those drivers are working class families trying to make ends meet in a city where parking is limited, and those who give tickets are running through the city giving tickets all over the place. And so I want to make sure we create a holistic system to keeping our hotels and restaurant industry vibrant by supporting it all the way around. I don't remember offhand Councilmember McDuffie's first bill, but I would like to research that and give some thoughts to that later on. And so today I will not be in support of the emergency legislation, but I look forward to working with you and the other members to get us to the finish line.
Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councilor Allen, for moving forward and trying to be responsive to some of the concerns that folks have heard from some of our smallest restaurants. We've had the debate up here as a body on a number of occasions in the last several years about where the appropriate line of intervention is with private business decisions. I think it's a line that everybody may come to their own personal decision on, but I do think it's important as a government that we take that seriously when we are going to intervene in private business decisions and when we would have a level of consistency from one industry to another. This circumstance feels a little bit different to me than other ways I've argued in the past, like with the hotel industry, for example, because these third-party applications are really operating like a marketplace and have essentially an oligopoly on this type of business. But I am concerned with some of what Councilmember McDuffie is talking about with both the Restaurant Association's opposition to this bill, but also not just putting a Band-Aid on one piece of it when this may require a more thoughtful long-term conversation. And it's been referenced, Councilmember Allen, that there have been a number of versions of this amendment. And so can you speak to kind of how you landed on the current version of this amendment and what practical impact it will have on these operators?
Sure. Thank you very much, Councilor Pinto. I found the comment about multiple iterations a very odd comment, seeing that we just passed the street vendors legislation that had an amendment in the age for substitute and even an amendment at 12:10 this afternoon, but we didn't say that all of a sudden somehow the iterations changed and threw us all off. As we do with legislation, we drafted it, shared it with stakeholders, got feedback, including feedback from Uber Eats and DoorDash, sent copies to the Restaurant Association asking for their feedback, talked with others, and then was able to make changes to it. So the iterations that you see are the natural part of sharing with stakeholders, getting feedback and making changes. The piece of why this matters to do this now is that we want to be able to prohibit these third-party apps from reducing a restaurant's placement on a list solely based on the fact that they're paying the lower 15% fee. There are elements that need to be part of a permanent bill, part of a hearing. That could do everything from the radius around an establishment, which would also get into proprietary information within an algorithm. There is no other permanent bill in front of us. There is no other emergency bill in front of us. This is it. And the action we need to take today is because we've got our local restaurants that are asking us for help. That if we are concerned, I'll finish up real fast. If we're concerned about making sure that these restaurants can survive at a time they're treading water, if we're concerned about making sure that our gig economy continues, because if these restaurants go under, that is fewer deliveries to be made. The out-of-state companies that are making billions of dollars are not going into the pockets of our gig drivers. They're not going into the pockets of our small restaurants. So this is an action. The Restaurant Association's message they sent out today said that they want to see legislation that changes more of this. So that's the only reason that they're saying that they don't support this right now. They said it doesn't solve all the problems. And as I said in my statement, it's not intended to solve all the problems. That's where a permanent bill and a hearing hopefully comes in.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, can I have 30 more seconds? I just have a follow-up question.
Without objection.
So I hear all that, and I am not suggesting that the fact that there have been multiple iterations means that it's not a good proposal. I'm just trying to understand how you landed on the language that you did around the platforms to understand what practical impact this will have on businesses to prevent them from being pushed off the platform.
And that feedback is from meeting with the third-party apps themselves, talking with other restaurants and getting other feedback. That's where the changes come as it does with all good legislation.
Language that you currently have, what is it going to do?
What it is going to do is specifically focus on prohibiting an app from being able to reduce a restaurant's placement on a list solely based on the fact they're paying the lower 15% commission fee. The issues around radius, for example, I don't think because you've got proprietary information, that is also an issue that's been raised by the Restaurant Association and others. And I think that's more appropriate to be able to have a permanent bill and hold a hearing to flesh that out. But that's not going to happen today. And our restaurants are asking us for help today.
Thank you.
Further on the bill?
Just one
No,
quick-
second reading. I mean, so you'll be second round. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my first round. I have a few critical questions for helping me digest this very quickly. The three questions are, what are the specific objections of the Restaurant Association? How does this emergency bill harm restaurants, and how soon could we expect permanent legislation? That would help me sort through this. So,
That to the,
uh,
to me or to whom?
let's start with you, Councilmember Allen. Since you're
Thanks.
Here,
So your question was around,
what are the specific objections of the Restaurant Association?
they said, to be sure, there is more work to be done here. A number of issues have come up, not only regarding concerns over search results, but also questions about delivery radius, among others. We're unsure if this emergency legislation fully addresses all the concerns. And while we appreciate the council looking into the matter, we don't support the emergency legislation as drafted at this time. So I mentioned earlier the issue around delivery radius. That's also part of some concerns from proprietary algorithm language, which would be best suited, I think, from permanent legislation and a public hearing.
Okay. How does this emergency before us harm restaurants, local restaurants, DC?
It would not harm any local restaurants. This emergency legislation, it would help them.
Councilmember McDuffie, is there harm here to this legislation?
I don't think, let me be clear, I don't think Councilman Rowell is trying to harm any restaurants, right? And I'm not either. I don't think, perhaps I would ask the question a little differently. I get concerned about sending a false sense restaurants. A moment ago, Councilmember Allen said it goes to reduce the placement of a restaurant, prevent the reducing of the placement of a restaurant on an app solely based on the fact that they pay the 15% rate. But then if you read the legislation, I don't have it in front of me, but it makes all these exceptions. And I think the exceptions sort of swallow whatever his goal was intended to be, because if I pay a 15% rate as a restaurant, but then other people pay whatever else in order to get certain placements somewhere else, somebody's always going to be on the bottom. And simply paying 15%, you don't want them to be erased off a platform. And I appreciate that's part of what he's trying to accomplish here. I guess my short version is, Councilman White, is I would love to be able to work with whoever has an interest in this to better address the issue. Doing this via emergency, I think, sends falsely a signal that we're fixing something. And I just don't really think that this bill is fixing much. And then the other part is the law just went into effect a little while ago, right? And so how is the law working to address some of the challenges? And so, you know what I mean? So there's a number of questions that we haven't answered. This bill doesn't answer it and doesn't really do much to fix anything. It's the way I feel about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis George, and then Councilmember Bonds.
Yeah. So I think the question on harm is fair that my colleagues are getting to. I don't see anything in this language that would harm. And I think this conversation, it may not fully help, but I think its goal is to try and prevent unfair exclusionary placement that makes things unequal, essentially. And I gotta say, I am a little bit torn here doing this on emergency, and I'm wondering if, as we're having conversations on this side, if because I also don't know if delivery platforms, and I'm saying they are blatantly trying to get around DC law limiting delivery fees to 15%, which is already high. And we likely haven't heard much about it yet because the higher fees haven't been imposed yet, and they may soon. But I don't want to base making this decision on that. So I'm asking, I'm not making the motion, I'm making the consideration if that could be considered, if if we would consider a motion to table. No? Okay. All right, I think with that, I mean, I think I'm going to vote present just because I don't feel like I haven't heard from Ward 4 businesses by themselves to say to me, but I also don't trust the validity of the arguments made on the other side. And I don't feel comfortable with that piece right there. So I will vote present if we're not going to move to table.
Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One, have the third-party companies informed the restaurants that they will begin to pay a higher commission fee of around 30% for local delivery in order to continue to receive the service level that they are accustomed to? I just wanted to know what you know about that. Yeah, yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes, ma'am.
Through the chairman, sorry, through the chairman too.
Through the chair, yes. There has been notifications gone. I'll read one of them, for example, talking about the commission rate at 25%, saying that your delivery radius will decrease, meaning fewer customers can order. You will have customers might end up paying more for an increase. Will no longer refund commission fees if you receive fewer than 20 orders per month. So they are being notified. And they're being notified in a way that clearly says you either got to pay a higher commission rate than you already are, or we are starting to reduce the services you get, reduce the ability to get to customers. And that's what this is all about, right?
Yep.
Which side, who are we here fighting for?
Yeah.
Our local businesses.
Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to make sure that the public understood what we are really discussing. And then does the act limit the total fees charged to restaurants by the platform to no more than 15% of the purchase price on the online order? That's the second part of my question, which is contained in the first question, but.
Through the chair, it does not limit a restaurant from saying they can only do 15%. They could choose to go to that kind of premium level, that higher level if they'd like to. And I don't think it'd be an appropriate role for the council to say that the business can't take advantage of or want to see that type of advertising or that type of additional service. But because and I think one of my colleagues talked about this, there is such a incredibly large amount and share of the marketplace. We got restaurants that are telling us 50% of all their sales are coming through these online third-party delivery apps. That if that lion's share of the marketplace means that these guys have to figure out how to either pay the 15% and they're watching themselves get, in essence, pushed down, smaller radius, smaller ability to reach customers and make those sales. That's why they're calling it a sham, that 15% is a sham. They have to step up to the 25% or higher. And that is absolutely undermining their ability to recover, to keep people employed, to keep those gig workers going. And meanwhile, those big third-party companies, like I said, 35% over last year increase, 70% increase over last year. Our restaurants aren't seeing that. Our workers aren't seeing that.
And I, through the chairman, I agree that the restaurants aren't seeing it, but I'm trying to understand how this legislation is really going to attack the big boys, the third-party big boys, because I'm not hearing that it's really going to attack them.
It does if I can answer very quickly, because I know time.
All right. Okay, great.
Absolutely. That it is not correct to say this does nothing. But while it is true that it does not do everything, it absolutely works to prohibit the apps from reducing the restaurant's placement on a list solely based on the fact they're paying the lower 15% commission fee. It makes sure that if you are going to stay at the 15% fee, much of our restaurants can't even afford that, but to go up to the 25 and 30% is too much. It at least holds them at that. Question got asked earlier, does this do any harm? Absolutely not. Does it help protect at least the folks that are going to stay at the 15%? It absolutely does.
So those that stay at 15% can continue to stay at 15%, but they will not benefit from being a choice placed on the list, Because from our breakfast meeting this morning, it was pointed out that those that are choice placed are usually at the beginning of the app. Once you put the pizza in, those, okay, all right, gotcha. All right, thank you very much. I don't think I can support this legislation today. Thank you.
Let me see, who's next on first round? There's a hand down there. Is that Henderson? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Fruman, and then you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This has been a fascinating discussion, both in the breakfast and here. And part of what I'm struck by is that the complaints about this legislation are either that it doesn't do enough or that it doesn't do anything. And that's what I've been hearing. And in the sense of it not doing anything, and I hear you, Councilmember McDuffie, that it sort of sends a message that something important might be happening and it may not be happening through this legislation. I have not heard how the legislation works negatively. And it's just a question of whether it's the thorough job that should be done here. I think, based on this conversation, the importance of a full hearing on permanent legislation to really go into the kinds of issues, Councilmember McDuffie, that you've been raising and Councilmember Pinto has been raising, super, super important. Then the question is, what do we do here? And what do I do here? And I almost see this as largely symbolic at this point. If the problem is it doesn't do enough, or the problem is it doesn't do anything, then what's our vote mean? And I see it in the way that Councilmember Allen sees it, that if I want to do something today, I want to send a message that we are trying to go to bat for our small restaurants in the face of these giant national apps. And that when we get to the permanent legislation stage, that's the attitude that we will bring to it. And I think that's the message that a vote for this legislation sends, and I will send that message and hope others will too.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the debate that's happening. I just want to clarify for folks, and just from an expectation setting standpoint. So the emails that I'm getting from restaurant owners are talking about how they don't want to see commission caps doubled. And that's why we should support this emergency. And I want to be clear that that is not what this emergency does. In terms, and if we want to rehash what we talked about last year to do that in a fuller setting of whether or not we need to do commission caps, we can certainly do that. But I just want people to be clear around what we are and aren't doing here. All of that being said, I've been taking notes on the comments from colleagues, and perhaps, Councilmember Allen, you might consider taking a beat here.
Taking a what?
A beat? Perhaps table, let's come back to this in May. I'm counting. We're not there. So I don't know if you would entertain a motion to table to the May. Well, I want to ask if that's okay.
I appreciate the question. I have talked with dozens and dozens of restaurants that are asking us to take action. Members of the Restaurant Association, they're asking us to take action. I've committed that I'm trying to take action. I would rather focus on them and choose trying to help solve a problem for them and support them over a big third-party app. I'm not supporting a motion to table. If someone makes a motion to table, you certainly could. I don't support it. I encourage my colleagues not to do that. I think it's a very clear opportunity here to decide which side are we standing on. I'll continue to work on this, continue to work with other colleagues on this, but I think that our restaurants are asking us for help, and they are seeing what's happening to their business. And it is not just the restaurants, as has been pointed out. The gig workers are also going to be impacted by this. They're absolutely going to be hurt by this. So we have an opportunity to act. I'd like for us to act.
Councilmember?
To do
Can I-
that.
can I-
right.
can I
No, I'm
just-
just, I'm gonna say
Councilmember
motion to close
Henderson
debate.
Still has the floor. What'd you say? Did you say you moved to close debate?
No,
Ah.
Mr. Chairman, I already asked for a second one.
Councilmember
Okay,
Henderson.
no, I take it back. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, y'all already.
Just a moment, Mr. McDuffie. Councilmember Henderson, were you done?
I really am. But I'm also trying to just, I'm counting and we're not there. So that's all. But
Okay.
I know that Councilmember McDuffie wanted to respond to some stuff, so.
Yes, I'm still on first round. Is there anybody else who's not spoken?
Oh, you can do it.
I have two on second round, Councilmember McDuffie and Councilmember Lewis George. Mr. McDuffie, you want to go first?
Just really, really briefly, it bothers me that this is it's an attempt to frame this as if, this is all about supporting third-party apps, big businesses. Raise your hand if that's what you're about and that's what you're trying to do, because I'm not. And I don't think any of my colleagues are. So let's not fall victim to this notion of the politics behind this, because this isn't about helping these big third-party apps. And I think it is telling that Mr. Allen said that he's talked to the third-party apps. In fact, I think you mentioned DoorDash supports it, but the Restaurant Association doesn't. So it seems like this isn't something that, is been well thought out. I appreciate the attempt. I'll just say this finally, for context for everybody. We put the 15% cap in during the pandemic. As we put in moratoria and other things in other areas. We're out of the pandemic, although some businesses and individuals are still struggling in our city. And we're trying to think about ways to support them. This is, I think, another attempt to support our restaurants, and it's something that I'd like to be able to do. This is just not the vehicle, is what I'm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Councilmember
Chairman.
Lewis George.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, I'm going to move to table. Until
To
the,
table or to postpone to a time certain?
to postpone to May
May 2nd?
2nd. Thank you very much.
All right, there's a motion to
Mr.
postpone
Chairman.
to May 2nd. That does have precedence.
I had a colleague who used my name, kind of a point of personal privilege.
I don't want to be harsh, but I didn't hear anything that was inappropriate. So. there's a
Trying to speak
motion
for
to
me.
Postpone, and that takes precedence over debate. It is debatable, the motion to postpone as to the date. Not hearing that by
Mr.
a
Chairman.
voice. What's that, Councilmember Tran White?
My hand over here on this side.
Okay, Councilmember Allen?
I do not support a motion to postpone to any date. I think certainly had my fair share of folks throwing insults at us last week, hearing words like not well thought out on a piece of legislation that we worked on with various stakeholders. If there's not a point of personal privilege there, I'm not sure what is. But we guess I thought we got all the insults out last week. This is a piece of legislation that clearly stands with our local restaurants. I asked my colleagues not to postpone it. They're asking for your help. They're asking for help right now. There's no other permanent bill that's been introduced. I'm going to introduce one later today. There's no other emergency bill that's on the table. Got one right here. So let's take an action to help. As we've said, it doesn't solve every problem. We'll introduce some permanent legislation and we'll continue to work on it. But I asked my colleagues not to postpone it and to vote today.
There's a motion to postpone till May 2nd. By a voice vote. All those in favor of the motion to postpone to May 2nd, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
The ayes have it.
Sounds like a roll call,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair.
Calling for a roll call is in order before the result is announced. The result was announced.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry. I even paused when I said there'll be a voice vote. So
You really aren't going to do a roll call for that.
correct. The measure is
That is
postponed until May
ridiculous.
2nd. Now, let me be clear here. We've been through this before. The rule is very clear. A member can ask for a roll call vote at any time prior to the vote being announced by the chair. That is the rule. We've actually been through this discussion once before, as in a few months ago. There were a couple of opportunities to ask for a roll call vote.
There were a couple.
So the next measure is the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Information Sharing Emergency Declaration Resolution 2023. Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I am moving the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Information Sharing Emergency Act of 2023 and Declaration Resolution of 2023. As district residents continue to lose their loved ones to gun violence, we must act with urgency to develop and invest in evidence-based preventative interventions. And we cannot do that without a thorough look backwards to understand consistencies in the trends that we're seeing. In 2022, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, or CJCC, partnered with the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, MPD, and other law enforcement agencies to conduct a detailed analysis of shootings and homicides in DC. The Office of Gun Violence Prevention and CJCC then commissioned the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform to develop a comprehensive gun violence reduction strategic plan with proposed recommendations in the areas of violence prevention, violence intervention, and community transformation to reduce gun violence. This was one of the recommendations of the strategic plan, to have a longitudinal cohort analysis of young people between the ages of 18 and 24 who've been convicted of homicide and attempted homicide, and trace their backgrounds for system involvement to identify where some of these gaps are. The emergency legislation before us today would provide CJCC with access to this personally identifiable information that they need to conduct this critical analysis. More specifically, this emergency legislation directs the Department of Healthcare Finance to provide CJCC with protected healthcare information, such as mental health or substance use diagnoses. The Department of Healthcare Finance needs this legislation and authority so that they can have clear authority under HIPAA and the Mental Health Information Act to share this information just with CJCC. I do want to be very clear that MOUs have been signed between DHCF and CJCC, and they're very restrictive in regard to how this information is transferred, used, and handled after the study. Data is required to be transferred on an encrypted flash drive and hand delivered to an authorized CJCC staff member. The data is then transferred to a secure CJCC workstation and handled by CJCC statisticians. CJCC is only permitted to publicly share non-personally identifiable information, and at the completion of the study, CJCC is required to destroy all personally identifiable information. And in an ode to our former colleague, Councilmember Silverman, in English, I will say that means that information from the Department of Healthcare Finance will be shared just with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, so we can look at this information and understand where there were gaps in the system and intervening earlier with this cohort ages 18 to 24 who ultimately were convicted of homicide or attempted homicide. That's that piece. Separately and unrelatedly, this emergency makes amendments to the section of the DC Code that creates a rebuttable presumption that certain injuries or illnesses are the result of the regular performance of duties by the Fire and Emergency Medical Services Department members. Firefighters diagnosed with these conditions are eligible for certain medical, disability, and retirement benefits, often critical not only to their treatment, but peace of mind while seeking care. Mr. Chairman, may I have another minute, please?
1 minute.
We speak often about the need to honor our first responders, and covering these benefits for our firefighters who put their lives at risk every single day on behalf of district residents is quite literally the least that we can do. However, the current list of conditions covered under the law excludes a number of cancers that can be caused by work as a firefighter. I will say I'm now working with the Office of Budget Director and Office of Revenue Analysis to expand the list of covered cancers covered in the code and plan to do so through this year's Budget Support Act. But my proposed changes today would bring us on parity with what's offered in Maryland and Virginia. This emergency legislation today only addresses adding one type of cancer, which is liver cancer, to the list. I have learned that there's a member diagnosed with this particular type of cancer who's actively seeking benefits today, and the current language of the code prevents them from doing so. I briefly want to just say I'm moving an amendment to this emergency today, which removes a type of cancer that we had thought we needed to add. When filing the emergency legislation yesterday, we included adenocarcinoma cancer, but FEMS has since informed me that the member that language would have helped has now been approved for coverage. So I want to note again, I'm looking for a more comprehensive expansion to these benefits in the BSA, but I want to move this emergency today so that we can support this member. So I ask my colleagues in supporting both of these pieces. I move the emergency declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? Councilmember, is that Henderson? Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I raised some questions to Councilmember Pinto in the breakfast, and I just wanted to say for the record for people who are listening. In between, I've had an opportunity to talk more with Department of Healthcare Finance around whether or not they believe that they can do this. And while they may not be able to deliver the information exactly as outlined in the legislation, they do believe that there could be a path forward in terms of an MOU for this research. And so I look forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tran White.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Councilmember Brooke Pinto and her leadership in this and the work that CJCC have been doing for decades now. And we do know there are some indicators already documented that leads to crime in Washington, D.C. We do know that there's the direct correlation between poverty and crime. There has been over 1,700 people shot in DC in the last 3 years, and over 80% of those individuals are African-American. We know that the wealth gap for Blacks in Washington, DC has also widened over the last 3 decades, and our crime rate is the highest it's been in 2 decades while we are still studying. I know this bill is not designed to address solutions as relates to the crime, and it's designed to get data. But we already know some of these things. We have data on the housing disparities, the wealth disparities, the health disparities, and every other disparity that we have in the city is directly impacting Black and brown people. And so while I'm not against this measure, I just want to encourage this body to utilize our resources to address the solution, right? And some of these solutions. And so I just wanted to take a personal privilege to highlight that as I continue I did 3 funerals in the last 8 days of Black people in the city, all under the age of 19. Just this Saturday, I did a visual for 2 people at the same time. And I've never done that before. And so we are in a place where, yes, we have to have the correct data, but we do have some information which I know CJCC has. And so I wanted just to highlight that, and I'm going to support this, but I wanted to add that caveat to say that we can do more with this body of work that we have in the District of Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Further on the declaration? Second round, Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to address Councilmember White's point, and I completely agree that there is both information out there around some of the trends and the disparities that we know we have in our city that we need to address in their relation to violence. but also that we need to do more with data sharing. And as the chair of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, I intend to go further this spring and this year on other ways that we can share that information to have more concrete solutions in this space. I do think that this is slightly different in its importance in that it's not just looking at trends and disparities, it's looking at the specific people who have been convicted of homicide and attempted homicide to more holistically understand where we went wrong as a city. Were they justice involved? Did they have other touch points with the criminal justice system? Did they have issues in their school? What was going on with their family? Because if we can zoom in and better understand where we went wrong and where those gaps were with this cohort, I do believe it will lead to more actionable and more productive solutions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, we have the declaration before us. This is PR 25-176. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker?
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White?
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds?
yes,
Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman?
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray?
Yeah, yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George?
Yes.
Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie?
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson?
Yes,
Mendelson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
the declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-222. Councilmember Pinto,
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
discussion. Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we'll do a voice vote on the bill. On Bill 25-222, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Secretary, I don't hear or see any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is Historic Preservation of Derelict District Properties Extension. I move the declaration, which is PR 25-152. This emergency legislation is necessary to allow the Lafont Trust to continue to rehabilitate remaining historic home in Anacostia for resale as workforce housing. There are actually 2 of the 4 houses that have not been sold, and 1 still needs to be renovated. In 2016, this council adopted legislation to transfer 4 historic properties that were at the time held by the district, to transfer them to the Lafont Trust for rehabilitation and eventual resale of the properties at no cost to the district. As of last month, 3 of the 4 properties have been renovated and 2 had been sold. The trust is on the verge of going to closing on the 3rd home, and the 4th should be completed within the next 3 years. The 2016 legislation, however, had set a sunset of 5 years, and the financing just got in place for the renovation of the 4th home. So this emergency will extend the deadline to 10 years, expiring in 2028. This has been a remarkable project with the Lafont Trust. The trust has taken 4 dilapidated and vacant properties that were owned by the district in a historic district and renovated them to historic district standards and put them back into use at no cost to the district. I move the declaration. Is there discussion? On the declaration by roll call vote, Madam Secretary?
Councilmember Parker?
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White?
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds?
yes,
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman?
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray?
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George?
Yes.
George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-207. So moved. Is there discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we can do a voice vote on the bill. On the bill, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any no votes? Madam Secretary, I don't hear or see any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. Migrant Services Eligibility Emergency. The declaration is PR 25-146. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. I wrote the Migrant Services Eligibility Emergency Amendment Act of 2023, along with Councilmember Louis George and her team, to address some concerns that have become clear with the Migrant Services and supports temporary act that the council passed last year to establish the Office of Migrant Services. The legislation first sets clearer expectations of services the Office of Migrant Services will offer, including that it will provide baby supplies and formula, prioritize families for access to non-congregate shelter, and define more clearly the relocation services for migrants coming into the district. The legislation will also improve transparency and due process for migrants seeking services. It does this in several ways. First, by requiring the office to publish eligibility requirements for migrant services, including online, and to establish them through rulemaking. Second, the legislation requires clear written and oral notice when OMS denies or terminates services and sets language access requirements for those notices. Finally, the legislation addresses ambiguities in the prior temporary legislation that could cause negative effects on residency determinations for district residents seeking access to homeless services. This emergency ensures that pre-existing district residents don't lose their residency status if they get entangled in the immigration system, and ensures that others are not permanently barred from becoming residents because of an immigration proceeding. After we pass this declaration, I will be moving an amendment in the nature of a substitute reflecting edits since we filed this legislation a couple weeks ago. I also want to note that I anticipate we will need a permanent legislative solution for migrant services, and there are a number of important questions we will need to resolve before we take that step later this year. I move the declaration at this time.
Thank you, Councilmember White. The amendment nature of a substitute was circulated yesterday. Is linked on the agenda. Correct?
It is.
Thank you. Councilmember Louis George.
Thank you, Councilmember White, for moving this measure today and for coordinating council members' visit to hotels that DHS is operating for migrant services that myself and Councilmember Parker and Councilmember Fruman all got an opportunity to visit. And thank you to DHS for welcoming us into those spaces. I think confronted with a broken immigration system and cruel policies of border states to deceive and bus migrants to cities around the country like ours without any coordination, DC has responsibility to provide dignified services for new arrivals and live out our values as a welcoming sanctuary city. In addition to local volunteers, mutual aid networks, and community organization, DC government has set up resources and support for recently arrived migrants. This measure is about strengthening the DC government infrastructure we have in place to support migrant families during this difficult period in their lives. This measure helps ensure that migrant families have equal access to safe, clean, and well-maintained living conditions while in hotels, are eligible to receive infant formula for their babies as a part of their meal plans, are provided relocation services that include support permanently settling in DC, such as helping a family enroll in our schools. Unfortunately, the reports we received from the ground and in recent oversight hearings included hardships experienced in hotels and unnecessary barriers to accessing services. We have also heard about language access issues related to migrant services and people being wrongfully turned away from homelessness services without a clear explanation or recourse. This bill is about empowering DHS to provide comprehensive and appropriate services to each person who needs them and ensuring that no one in our city falls through the cracks. DHS has shared many times that temporary migrant services laws was not meant to exclude permanent immigrant DC residents from DC's homeless services, but we have heard from a number of residents that people have been excluded while we have these two separate systems in place. This bill addresses that issue by adding protections and clarity for permanent immigrant DC residents, and it addresses initial drafting issues that created unintended barriers to existing DHS services. I'm grateful to DHS and Councilmember White for working with my office to make these improvements, and I look forward to working with you on a permanent infrastructure soon. I encourage all my colleagues to vote for the declaration and the revisions in the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further on the declaration? We'll have a roll call vote on the declaration PR 25-146. Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Middleton.
Yes.
Chairman Middleton votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-197. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned a minute ago, I circulated an amendment in the nature of a substitute yesterday, which I would like to move at this time.
So say so moved to the bill and then.
Yes,
move
so
the-
moved, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, and then proceed.
Thank you. The amendment reflects changes we negotiated with the Department of Human Services since we filed this emergency 2 weeks ago and reflects the input of stakeholders as well as technical changes we made at the request of the General Counsel. These changes should help the department interpret and implement the Emergency Act and result in a fiscal impact that the department can absorb. I move the ANS, Mr. Chairman, and further ask that the associated temporary legislation later today be conformed to match the emergency as amended by the General Counsel.
Thank you, Councilmember. So we have the amendment nature for substitute before us. Is there discussion? We'll do a voice vote. This is on the amendment nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the bill as amended before us. Is there any further discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously and the amendment nature of a substitute appeared to be unanimous by voice vote, we'll do a voice vote on the bill, Bill 25-197 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. If there's no objection, I'm going to recognize Councilmember Pinto for a motion to reconsider.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and my apologies to you and colleagues. This is for purposes of moving the same amendment that I just talked about with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, but it was not incorporated to the bill we just voted on. So I move to reconsider Bill 25-222, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Information Sharing Emergency Amendment Act of 2023 for the purpose of moving the accompanying amendment number 1.
All right, so there's a motion to reconsider Bill 25-222. I believe that's debatable. Is there discussion? By a voice vote, to reconsider Bill 25-222. All those in favor say aye.
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 The matter is before us.
Thank you very much. I move amendment number 1 to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Information Sharing Emergency Amendment Act of 2023, which I circulated yesterday at 8:16 PM. This is the same amendment that I spoke about last time for the presumptive disability. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, we have the amendment. Any discussion about it? It was circulated when?
Last night at 8:16 PM.
All right, we have, let me see. Actually, I think the way we'll do this is the amendment. If there's no objection, the amendment will be accepted. Hearing no objection, the amendment is accepted. We have the bill as amended. Further discussion. Voice vote. All those in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. You agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill as amended is approved unanimously. We will go back to the regular agenda order. The next measure is number 5 on page 10, inflation mitigation for rent stabilized housing emergency declaration resolution of 2023, PR 25-154. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One moment, please. I have a lot of statements coming up. There we are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the Rental Housing Act of 1985, the district limits annual rent increases for units in certain older buildings. We call this rent stabilization or rent control. This May, district residents in rent stabilized units will face the highest rent increase the district has seen in 40 years. Due to high inflation over the last year, landlords can raise rents up to 8.9%. This increase is coming at a time where many low-income residents are not only still recovering from the pandemic, but are also seeing higher prices everywhere. I worry that for some people, this increase will be too much and will tip them into eviction. I've heard from so many tenants who are afraid of this outcome for themselves. The past few weeks, my office and I have worked with tenants, advocates, landlords, and our colleagues to find a way to blunt this increase and prevent the further displacement of district residents. Currently, the maximum rent increase in these units is limited to the Consumer Price Index inflation rate plus an additional 2%. The district's Rental Housing Commission approves the maximum increases each year. The rent administrator for the district's Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD, then sends a notice of maximum increase to building owners. Owners are only allowed to take this annual adjustment once per year and can choose a lesser amount than the maximum. Individual tenants' rents change at various times throughout the year, depending on the tenant's lease term. This past January, the Rental Housing Commission approved a 8.9% maximum increase to rents in rent stabilized units. The increase would take effect on May 1st of this year. DHCD and tenants have said that some landlords already filed notices of rent adjustment. However, landlords typically give these notices out throughout the year, depending on a tenant's lease anniversary date, meaning there is not an influx of filings just before May 1st date for the new rate. It is possible some of those notices so far included a maximum 8.9% increase, but DHCD does not track the rates on the rent filings they receive. Landlords have expressed the need for higher rents to cover rising maintenance and business costs, and tenants have raised serious concerns that an 8.9% increase will cause significant hardship and lead to displacement. My goal with this legislation was to balance the impact of staggering inflation costs on renters with the rising costs of business on landlords, which could ultimately harm tenants and the district's affordable housing stock. Can I have an additional minute, Mr. Chairman?
1 minute.
Emergency legislation in the council cannot come with a cost. That cost is called a fiscal impact. The Bowser administration insists that this emergency rent control legislation will have a fiscal impact on DHCD. In fact, the administration said that any change in the Rental Housing Act would cost the agency money. For the past couple of weeks, including during my committee's budget oversight hearing with DHCD yesterday, several council colleagues and I sought to clarify from the agency how the council can help with this cost. We asked for specifics on the administrative costs and were told DHCD would have to reissue notices to landlords about a new adjustment rate. We asked whether an existing vacant position that is already funded within the Rent Administrators Division could help with this additional workload. DHCD did not say yes, but it was not clear why. DHCD has a lot on its plate, including setting up a new rent control database that will be very useful for the public and the council. However, in an emergency situation like this one, it is critical for the district to prioritize residents' needs effectively, especially when other work can and will still get done. I haven't seen the most effective prioritization of the mayor's proposed budget, and I don't see it in this situation. Because of the mayor's fiscal impact statement, the council cannot move forward with the inflation mitigation for rent stabilized housing emergency and temporary measures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Madam Budget Director, does this measure have a fiscal impact? Madam Budget
Yes,
Director.
it does. We issued one that says that there is a small cost, small temporary cost that would be incurred by DHCD due to the uptick of work to determine which rent control apartments would now be out of compliance with the rent cap.
And to be clear, the executive has not indicated a willingness to absorb that cost.
Correct.
So the measure would be out of order.
Mr. Chairman, question.
Yes.
For the record, can the Budget Office confirm the date of communication with DHCD?
Are you able to do that?
I can say that we have been going back and forth for over a week. I don't have the exact date of initial contact, but it has been a pretty significant amount of time.
For the
back and
record,
forth.
can you confirm that it was before Friday, March 31st?
Oh, absolutely.
And for the record, can you confirm that it was more robust than a yes or no question?
Yes, there were pretty detailed back and forths, not only between my office and DHCD, but also with the Office of Revenue Analysis and the CFO's office.
Thank you.
Councilman, if the measure is out of order, then it's out of order and there's not debate or discussion or even questions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, this wasn't to put our Budget Office on the spot, but it was
I
to
understand.
rectify confusion from the agency.
Yes, we could spend a lot of time trying to rectify confusion from agencies. I appreciate that. The measure is out of order and therefore it's not properly before us. The next measure, and Councilmember Robert White, I'm going to need some help from you. The next measure is local rent supplement program. We're dealing with that individually, and then we'll be dealing with these contracts in groups.
That would be easier. Mr.
All right,
Chair.
so local rent supplement program contract number 2021-LRSP-01A, emergency declaration resolution of 2023. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The underlying resolution would approve a contract between the DC Housing Authority and a developer entity associated with the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, or APAH. This developer responded to a local rent supplement program solicitation that the Department of Housing and Community Development spearheaded in 2021 and proposed to create a mixed-use building next to the Fort Totten Metro Station with retail space, underground parking, and 93 affordable rental housing units for seniors aged 62 years or older. Of the 93 units, 52 will be for senior households making 30% or less of the area median income, and 10 of those units will be permanent supportive housing. The council already approved a bond issuance in support of this project with the Housing Finance Agency, and now we're asked to approve an agreement to enter into a long-term subsidy contract. The purpose of this long-term subsidy contract is to provide $723,888 to help cover the eventual operating costs associated with 39 of the units for extremely low-income seniors. I plan to support this contract. There are two things I want to note for the members' awareness. First, the proposed development is on land that the district used to own, and that we disposed to the developers' affiliates in 2016. With a requirement that the housing to be developed needed to satisfy the affordable housing requirements currently codified at DC Code 10801B3. My staff has consulted with the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development and confirmed that although the proposed model has shifted from ownership units to rental units in this tract, the proposed affordability mix easily exceed the statutory requirements. The second thing I want to note is that there was a mix-up with DCHA's contract approval resolution last month. Because this is a multi-year contract, it requires active approval from the council. Ideally, we'd be voting on an approval resolution today that wasn't styled as an emergency measure. DCHA submitted an approval resolution to the secretary, but they didn't do so far enough in advance of today's meeting to get a referral from the chairman and then receive a notice of intent to act publication in the DC Register 15 days in advance. My office learned of the error too late to request abbreviated notice in the register, so we drafted and circulated our own emergency approval resolution Thursday morning so that this project could go ahead. The same is true of the next 7 items on the agenda, which also came from DCHA as active approval contracts with active approval resolutions. Despite these procedural hiccups, I support the substance of the measure. I move local rent supplement program contract number 2021-LRSP-01A, emergency declaration resolution of 2023. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? This is on PR 25-156. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying resolution, PR 25-157. Councilmember White,
So moved.
discussion. Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we'll do a voice vote on this. PR 25-157. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The measure is approved unanimously. Now, Councilmember White, am I moving the next 2 contracts in, I shouldn't say am I moving, are we considering the next 2 in block?
7 through 11, the next 5, but I'll discuss the differences between them.
Okay, so if there's no objection, items 7 through 11 will be considered in block. And I have to state for the record, I kind of hate doing this because the titles are miserable. The declarations, contract for services with the Keystone Plus Construction Contract Number DCHA CA XI C 2023, Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. That's PR 25-158. PR 25-160, contract for services with Chiramonte Construction Corporation Contract Number DCHA CA XI 2023. Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. PR 25-164. Contract for services with Protect Construction, Inc. Contract number DCHA CA XI D 2023 Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. PR 25-166, contract for services with CADCon Corporation, contract number DCHA, CA, XI, B 2023 Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. And PR 25-170, contract for services with Bennett Group, Inc., contract number DCHA, CA, XI, A 2023 Emergency Approval Resolution of 2023. There's no objection. These 5 declarations are before us. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. You did a wonderful job reading the names of these.
Thank you. I will apply to do reading at an elementary school next week.
On items 7 through 11, Chairman, let me discuss what they do. As we all know, the DC Housing Authority has been struggling to keep its public housing units in decent shape for years. Over a quarter of units were still vacant as of the agency's last update, and a lot of those vacancies are because the units are in such poor condition that people just can't live in them. Last fall, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development shone a bright light on these issues as part of its comprehensive assessment report on DCHA. Now DCHA has to show rapid, substantial progress on remedying a range of issues that HUD identified or risk harsh federal enforcement actions that I don't think any of us want. To respond to this new urgency, DCHA announced that they would conduct an inspection and maintenance surge. They're going into every single public housing unit and checking it against a comprehensive rubric. Where they spot urgent threats to habitability, they want to call in contractors to fix them. They also are planning to follow up work for items that can't be fixed properly on a short time frame or that are lower priority. The inspection part of this work is already underway. DCHA doesn't have the in-house personnel to handle all of the construction, repair, and replacement tasks that they're anticipating, so they wanted to bring on contractors quickly. To do this, they decided to piggyback on a construction, repair, and replacement service procurement that the Department of General Services conducted recently. DCHA looked at the list of successful bidders whom DGS recently selected to work on schools and other public buildings, reviewed their submission materials, and now are trying to hire a handful of those firms to service public housing buildings as well. DCHA has now selected 5 contractors and wants to engage each one for a single term of 4 years to award up to $15 million worth of task orders per contractor over that time. I continue to think that the amount of money that the mayor proposes to devote to DCHA's public housing capital projects is not nearly enough. I've seen DCHA's proposed capital spend plan for the next couple of years, and I think the agency is being overly optimistic on the cost of what they want to achieve. I hope that as we continue to work through the budget, we as a council might find some additional capital resources to accelerate or enhance the maintenance surge. That aside, in light of the dire need for public housing repairs and improvements, I think DCHA's proposed arrangement with these construction contractors is a good idea. Finally, I want to reiterate that these are before us as emergencies due to a technical issue with the timing of DCHA's filing as it relates to DC Register publication deadlines. But as I mentioned earlier, they are a type of contract that would have required an affirmative one-time vote of the council anyway. I'm moving the 5 emergency declaration resolutions, which are items F7 through 11 on the consent agenda.
Did you have anything further since you're doing, what is it, 5 of them?
I am doing 5. I am moving them now, Mr. Chairman, moving items F7 through 11 on the non-consent agenda.
Okay. Is there anyone who's not clear what we're doing here? That mean you're not clear, or you want something you want to say? Discussion. Councilmember Parker.
Mr. Chairman, and this is for Councilmember White. Just given ongoing concerns with DCHA, can you speak to how these contracts have been vetted? And then secondly, the implication of the timeline of our vote today versus the work being done?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Parker. DC Housing Authority is piggybacking off of DGS contractors that the city works with and has worked with in other capacities. So I don't have concerns about the contractors. The 4-year period of these contracts, I think, reflects the amount of work that needs to be done, but the contract amounts are capped. So I'm not at this point concerned about overspending. In fact, I don't think we have enough money to do all the work that's going to be necessary.
Mr. Chairman, just question for clarification. Thank you for that, Councilmember White. So each of these vendors have previously done work with DGS and they are not contractors sought out by DCHA. I'm just confirming. And for the record, these questions are just based on ongoing concerns around transparency and due diligence with the agency.
I appreciate the transparency and due diligence efforts, and I agree with them. Yes, these are contractors that have done a lot of work with DGS in the past.
Councilmember Parker? Any further discussion? All right, again, if any member is confused, please speak up. Otherwise, we're going to have a roll call vote on the 5 declarations. PR 25-158, PR 25-160, PR 25-164, PR 25-166, PR 25-170. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Trayon White,
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White shall be recorded as present. Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman,
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie,
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson,
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker,
Present.
Councilmember Parker shall be recorded as present. Councilmember Pinto,
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White,
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 11 yeses and 2 presents.
The declarations are approved. We have the underlying measures. And that would be PR 25-159, PR 25-161, PR 25-165, PR 25-167, and PR 25-171. Those are the contract approvals themselves for the 5 contracts that I identified earlier. Councilmember White,
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
discussion. I'm not hearing anyone asking to be recognized. We will have a voice vote on the 5. Since the declarations were approved by 11-0 vote. Voice vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Please record me as present.
Aye.
Are there any no votes? Councilmember Trayon White is asked to be recorded present.
Mr. Chairman, please record me as present as well.
Councilmember Parker is asked to be recorded as present. The voice vote is unanimous with 2 identified as present. The contracts are approved. Councilmember White, how do you want to proceed with the next?
We can move these last 2 in block. They are the same type of contract.
All right, if there's no objection. On page 11, number 12, and page 13, excuse me, page 12, number 13 will be considered together. Not hearing objection. That would be contract for services with JDC Construction Company LLC. Contract number DCHA 2023 Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. And contract for services with Brailsford and Dunleavy, Inc., contract number DCHA CAX 2023 Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. That's PR 25-162 and PR 25-168. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairman. These final two items are closely related to the ones we just voted on, where the last five items were about getting DCHA access to construction, repair, and maintenance and replacement services for public housing overhaul. These two are about procuring construction management services for the same surge. Like the last batch, these are 4-year contracts that allow DCHA to order services through separate competitively bid task orders as needed, but the total not to exceed value for each contractor over the 4-year term is $8 million instead of $15 million. I move the contract for services with JDC Construction Company LLC, contract number DCHA CAXA 2023 Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023, and the contract for services with Brailsford and Dunleavy Incorporated, contract number DCHA CAX 2023 Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there discussion? This will be a roll call vote on PR 25-162 and PR 25-168. Madam Secretary?
Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Present.
Councilmember Parker shall be recorded as present. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White shall be recorded as present. Mr. Chairman, there are 11 yeses and 2 recorded as present.
The two declarations are approved, 11-0. The underlying measures, that would be PR 25-163 and PR 25-169. Councilmember Robert White.
So moved.
Discussion. We'll do this by voice vote since the declarations were approved by 11-0 vote. On the underlying PR 25-163 and PR 25-169, all those in favor say aye.
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 Present. Please record me as present.
Chairman, please record me as present as well.
I didn't ask for no votes. I should need to ask for no votes. Are there any no votes? I don't hear any. Madam Secretary, do you see any no votes?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the underlying contracts are approved with Councilmembers Parker and Trayon White recorded as present. The next measure is African American Civil War Museum and Ben's Chili Bowl Limited Grant Making Authority Emergency. The declaration is PR 25-173. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman. Today, along with Council Members Parker and Robert White, I'm moving the African American Civil War Museum and Ben's Chili Bowl Limited Grant Making Authority Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023, along with associated emergency and temporary measures. Both these institutions likely need very little introduction. The African American Civil War Museum opened over 2 decades ago to help visitors understand the role of Black and Brown soldiers who fought for freedom from slavery during the Civil War. Ben's Chili Bowl is a fixture of U Street and an icon of DC and will be celebrating its 65th anniversary this year. Both the African American Civil War Museum and Ben's Chili Bowl's U Street location received prior funds to assist in the completion of substantial renovation by way of competitive grants through DEMPED. Due to increases in construction costs, DEMPED's initial grants for each of them were insufficient. Unlike most agencies, which could add funding to cover a gap, DEMPED requires council approval for specific grant-making authority, which we do have to do quite frequently, the last time only a few months ago. In the case of the museum, we are awaiting the completion of their brand new facility as part of the Grimke School redevelopment. For Ben's, they're building an old movie theater that's seen mostly cosmetic improvements over the years, is in need of substantial repairs and improvements in order to stabilize the site and keep it in operation for its next 65 years. The museum and Ben's are anchors on the U Street corridor, bringing hundreds of thousands of residents per year to the neighborhood. By serving as the landmarks they are, they help connect the entire area with the rest of district's tourism economy that might otherwise have passed it by. With that understanding, I've been working with the executive for quite some time to try and address the funding gap for the museum, and I thank them for making that a reality. DEMPED asked us to introduce legislation granting the necessary authority and also asked us to do the same for Ben's, with whom they've been working independently. I'm thankful for the assistance from staff and the executive in addressing this issue, and I ask my colleagues to support this measure to ensure the continued operation of these important anchors on U Street. Thank you, and with that, I move the resolution.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? Roll call vote on PR 25-173, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Bonds?
Yes.
Member Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman?
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray?
Yes.
Member Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson?
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George?
Yes.
Member Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie?
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson?
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker?
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White?
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. And Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. I managed to get lost here. Thank you. Page 12. The underlying bill 25-216.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we'll do a voice vote. Vote is on bill 25-216. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill's approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-155, Medical Cannabis Clarification Supplemental Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As part of the March 2021 through August 2022 medical cannabis facility licensing round, all medical cannabis facility registration applicants were constrained by a cap on the number of cultivation center and dispensary registrations permitted in each ward. The ABC Board's open application period made available 2 cultivation center registrations. Submitted cultivation center registration applications were scored by a 6-member selection panel consisting of individuals from 6 different district government agencies. Scoring by the selection panel resulted in a tie for second place with 2 cultivation center registration applicants, both of which are equity impact enterprises receiving the same total score. A dispute exists regarding the awarding of the second cultivation center registration, which to the detriment of the district hinders the ability of either cultivation center registration applicant that tied for second to proceed forward with opening and operating the cultivation center. Additionally, those applicants that made it to the second round after scoring the requisite 150 points or more during the open application period necessary investigated significant time, money, and resources into a legal and regulatory framework that the council changed shortly thereafter. There exists an immediate need for additional cultivation centers to open and operate in the district to ensure that a sufficient supply of medical cannabis is available for the additional retailers, internet retailers, and manufacturers permitted to apply for medical cannabis facility license under the Medical Cannabis Amendment Act of 2022. The Medical Cannabis Clarification Supplemental Emergency Amendment Act of 2023 will meet these stated needs and enable an eligible cultivation center applicant that scored 150 points or higher to be considered for cultivation center registration and have the option to change its location to another compliant property that was previously unavailable due to now removed cap, thereby enabling them to begin operations more quickly and better serve registered patients and retailers. The emergency legislation will similarly allow an eligible dispensary applicant to be considered for retailer registration and have the option to change its location to another compliant property that was previously unavailable to them due to the cap. With that, I move the declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? We will have a roll call vote on PR 25-155, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-212. Councilmember McDuffie,
So move.
is there discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we can do a voice vote on this. The vote is on Bill 25-212. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The bill is approved unanimously. I will turn now to temporary legislation. If there's no objection, Bill 25-215, the temporary bill will be considered or is considered to be postponed until May 2nd. Hearing no objection. Be so ordered. With regard to number 2, Bill 25-223, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Information Sharing, that the temporary will be conformed to the emergency. So that includes the amendments that were moved to the emergency. And same with regard to number 4, Migrant Services Eligibility Temporary. There was an amendment to that, and so the temporary is conformed to the emergency. Madam Councilmember Robert White, that's correct. And Madam General Counsel, that's clear enough for your purposes?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And number 5, inflation mitigation is not before us. If there is no objection, we will consider with regard to the temporaries. Number 2, Bill 25-223 as amended. Number 3, Bill 25-208. Number 4, Bill 25-198 as amended. Number 6, Bill 25-217, and number 7, Bill 25-213. Hearing no objection, those 5 measures are before us en bloc. Since there were multiple folks, I'll say so moved. Discussion. Councilmember McDuffie, you look like you want to say something.
Not on this.
You can't speak to a previous measure. It's not before us any longer. Hold on a second. So I'm going to ask for discussion on those 5 temporary bills. I'm not hearing any. I think we can do a voice vote, Madam Secretary,
I would love that, Mr. Chairman.
on the five temporary bills. All those in favor say aye, of the bills, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Madam Secretary, I don't see or hear any no votes. Do you agree?
Agreed, Mr. Chairman.
The five temporaries are approved unanimously. I believe that concludes the business for this meeting.
Chairman, I wanted to motion and reconsider. I thought I medical cannabis so that I can vote, please.
Second.
Nice try. Okay, I think that's because you were not here. All right, I will move, you cannot move to reconsider. I will move to reconsider. Bill PR 25-155. Which is a PR 25-155, which is the Declaration for Medical Cannabis Clarification Supplemental Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Move to reconsider. If there's no objection, it's before us. Hearing no objection, discussion. Hearing no discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. All members are present. Madam Secretary, is that good enough for your records?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And for the underlying bill, Bill 25-212, move to reconsider that, even though it's probably implicitly reconsidered. If there's no objection, it's before us. Is there discussion? Hearing none, by voice vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. All members are present. If there's anybody who's not here, please speak up. But somebody chuckled. All right. The committee of the whole is not scheduled to meet in April. The next legislative meeting is May 2nd at 12 o'clock. The time is 2:48 PM, and this meeting is